Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to take a look at something brand new from Hasselblad that is going to fundamentally change the possibilities of what you can do with the X2D as well as the 907X. This is the brand new version of Phocus Mobile 2. This is version 3.0, which adds something very awesome. This app now has one of the best noise reducing algorithms that I've used on any platform. It is amazing. So ISO on digital cameras is actually not the same as it is on film cameras at all. In the film era, we used film that had a sensitivity to it, and we would rate that sensitivity. It was a physical material that was sensitive to light. In digital photography, this is not that at all. Basically, what you're doing is you're taking a digital signal and you're using gain to amplify that signal. Now, we use the same number system as ISO from the film days because that's a metaphor that makes sense to photographers as we're switching into digital. It's still obviously alive today. Now, the result with digital is when you amplify that signal using gain to get higher ISO settings, you're going to also amplify any noise in the image. Now, we've always had noise reduction sliders in various software applications, and the challenge there is you're trying to reduce the noise without reducing detail, and that becomes very difficult. So what we have now with Phocus Mobile 2 version 3.0 is something very different. So Hasselblad are calling this natural noise reduction, and it basically works with an advanced neural network noise reduction AI model combined with the powerful computing capability of your smartphone. Now, I want to stop here for a second and talk about this AI software model. And I want to do this because anytime I mention AI software, I understand people get worried that the company is actually going to be uploading their images and using them to train the model. And that is not the case here. This does not require an internet connection at all. It all happens on the phone. The AI model is trained on Hasselblad's end using images from their cameras. And this really works well. And I want to show you an example here, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it works. So when you launch Phocus Mobile 2 on your mobile device, the first thing you want to do is connect the camera. And you're going to do that at the bottom of the interface here. And what it's going to do is it's going to use Bluetooth to actually establish the connection. Then it turns on the Wi-Fi. And the Wi-Fi is really good. In fact, the connection on this app is excellent. It takes just a couple seconds to transfer a file. And considering how large these files are, it's actually very impressive. Now, once you've got files onto the phone, what you're going to do to apply this noise reduction is very simple. You're just going to open any one of these images. Near the bottom, you're going to see this little button that says HNNR. That stands for Hasselblad Natural Noise Reduction. When you tap that, it's going to ask for two options here. You're going to tell it whether you want to prioritize purity or prioritize detail. And once you've done that, just select continue. And within a matter of seconds, depending on how fast your phone is, this is actually going to run this noise reduction across your image. The really cool thing about this is that it actually creates a raw image as a result. Now, I do want to note that you need to start with a raw image. This won't work with JPEGs. It will work with any file from the X2D or the 907X, as long as it's that raw file. And what you're going to do is actually create a new raw file that has the noise reduction applied, and it looks really good. Another thing that I want to add is I have pushed this really hard in my testing. Essentially, this will work at any ISO setting on the camera, from the base ISO of 64 all the way up to 25,600. And I've found in a number of scenarios here that a lot of Christmas light shooting, because that's what's up right now still. And you can see that it preserves all the detail in all of these images. And even with stuff that, like, where you don't have a huge dynamic range, for instance, between this house and the roof and maybe even the blue sky in the back, it still does an excellent job of cleaning things up. And what's really impressive is that you still preserve all the details. So I mentioned earlier in the past when we've used photo editors that have sliders for noise reduction, that's always the challenge, is like, does it suck detail out of the image as it's reducing the noise? And this one really doesn't at all. There's no sliders to work with or anything. And what it's doing under the hood is it's actually able to identify the scenario, whether it's a cityscape, a portrait, whatever it is in low light, and it applies the filter accordingly. Now, I have done tests on both purity as well as prioritized detail, and I did notice a slight difference between the two. For instance, in this image with the trees and all these branches that are holding off, there's a lot of detail obviously in this image, and it handles it extremely well. So it's a really simple option as you're going to do your processing, and then you're going to just apply it and it just does its thing. It's really simple and it's really easy to use. Now, the workflow on this, so I've gotten the images off of the camera here onto the phone. Now I want to get them maybe onto my computer so I can store them in Focus on the desktop or even Lightroom. And so what you're going to do here, go back out to the grid view, and we can actually batch these to transfer all of the images at one time. So what you're you're going to do is hit the little selection box at the top, and then we're going to go ahead and select all of the images that we want to bring in. You're going to notice that any image that's been modified with the noise reduction filter has this little icon for noise reduction on it. So I can just simply tap and select those. Then what you're going to do is select the output at the bottom of the screen here, and I can select a format. So if you want to export these as JPEGs, you have many options on that, or you can export them as a TIFF file. I actually want to bring in the original format, which is going to be that raw file, and it has the noise reduction applied. It's really cool. So I'm going to hit original, just say export. It's going to take a few minutes, and it's going to export all these images in batch to your desktop. And then what I can do is actually bring these into Lightroom from there, and I can work with them further and do some editing on them. And what is really cool about this is that it does support all of the ISO settings on the Hasselblad cameras. So why would you want to do this at, let's say, ISO 64, let's say? Well, technically speaking, the base ISO, which is going to be 64, is going to have the lowest noise and the best dynamic range. And so with any camera system, that's what you really want to aim for. You want to use the lowest ISO settings as possible. However, even at the base ISO, depending on how far you're pushing the image, even in a raw file, you're going to be able to push it pretty far, especially with the Hasselblad files. That's one of the highlights of the system. But there are circumstances where you have really dark shadows and you're really trying to pull that detail up, and all of a sudden digital noise hides in the shadows, and that's where it's going to exist. And so it allows you to even process these at ISO 64 if you wanted to get rid of that even. This works really well, and I'm really stunned with the results that I'm getting. A lot of times, especially when you're really high ISOs like 12,800, when things are pretty much black, you're still going to get these little white dots of noise in there. And this is pretty common with any camera system because we're at such a high ISO setting. A lot of gain has been applied to amplify that signal. The noise reduction algorithm in Focus 2 handles it extremely well, and it comes out very clean in the end. So one of the reasons that this algorithm works so well is Hasselblad have designed this specifically to the sensor that's used in the X2D and the 907X with the CV 100 megapixel back. And so because it's been designed for these sensors, it's going to give you very accurate and realistic results, and it's going to be very consistent camera to camera. Now, I want to say something else, that as a photographer, and I'm going to be honest with you, I have not been a big fan of a lot of the AI implementation that's come down the pike in recent years, or AI features that have been introduced into software that I already use. I just don't have a need for a lot of it. For instance, things like sky replacement, I don't do a lot of. Removing objects from an image, well, I'm a photographer. I try to get those right as I'm taking the image. It's not a very decisive moment if you need to remove a lot of things in an image, and it's maybe impressive from a technical perspective, but in a practical application, I don't have a lot of need for it. However, things like this, where I'm able to reduce noise and all of a sudden this camera becomes very usable at higher ISO settings, that's something I'm actually a big fan of. That's AI that's enabling me to do things that I can't normally do with standard equipment. It solves a problem. And so kudos for Hasselblad for implementing this. I think it actually is a very interesting solution. It's something that is very usable. Now, one thing I've been very impressed about, as well as very excited about, in terms of opening up new possibilities with these cameras, is that with the X2D, we have in-body image stabilization. When that came out, that was a huge boon because the IBIS is so good in there that I can handhold this camera with pretty slow shutter speeds and get really good results. Now, with the 907X, that is not the case, and because of the size of the body on here, we do not have in-body image stabilization. So what that means is that essentially your shutter speeds are going to have to be fast enough not to introduce any camera shake or motion when you're taking the picture. And with medium format, unfortunately, that's somewhat restrictive. And so the rule that I go by is you want to have double the shutter speed to the focal length. So if I have the 55mm lens on here, my shutter speed needs to be about 1/100th of a second or maybe even higher. And that's going to enable me to shoot without having any kind of camera shake in there. Now, it is a little bit different when you're using wider lenses. For instance, the 38, you're going to probably get away with 1/60th of a second. The longer lenses are going to have to be even faster. And so you really don't have any other option when you're shooting in low light with the 907X other than to use high ISO settings. And unfortunately, in the past, I've just kind of forgone that or use a tripod because it's just so slow at that point, and noisy with the ISO settings. And so what the Phocus Mobile 2 noise reduction algorithm does is it makes this camera all of a sudden very usable in a variety of situations. And I've always loved the 907X because the form factor on here. It's so small, it's so lightweight, and it's so easy to carry around and so fun to use. There is no other camera in the market like this. It is very unique. And all of a sudden, to open up more possibilities to low light shooting when you can just have this with you as a medium format camera with a very small footprint and be able to use this in low light, whether you're indoors or whether you're outdoors, it extends the possibilities with this camera tenfold. And that's one thing I'm really excited about this system on. Now, I do want to note a couple things. First of all, this is on Focus 2 mobile only, and it only works on iOS devices. So this means iPhones as well as iPads. And you do want to have fairly modern hardware to work with in terms of speed, because it's going to use the neural processing network within your camera. So iPhone 15, iPhone 16. I've noticed I have the iPhone 16 and my speeds are really fast on this. It takes about 7 seconds to noise reduce an image. It's really pretty impressive. Of course, your rate is going to vary depending on how new your device is. Another thing to note is you need to be shooting RAW. This will not work with JPEG images. Essentially, RAW is going to give you way more data. I don't really know why you would be shooting medium format and not be shooting RAW. I guess sometimes people just want a quick JPEG that they're going to be able to just hand off to something or post on social media. But to really take advantage of these cameras, you're going to want to shoot RAW anyway, and so that is the way you're going to work with this. Now, you can export to a lighter format if you want to export out to JPEG like I showed you before, but I love the fact that I can export a RAW image, and I can actually keep both of them to archive, and I can work with the noise-reduced image and do all my modifications and all my color work on there, contrast, anything that I need to do. It looks really outstanding. Anyway, go check it out. It is available for download today for free from the App Store. And if you have any questions, drop them below. I will catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.